And we're live. Welcome back to yet another episode. Thank you for sticking with us for the first 200 plus. And we look forward to another 200. So without any further distractions, hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans, it's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just three nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, I'm going to let our guest, Mr. Joe Vasicek, introduce himself.
Hi, my name is Joe. I write books and I publish them myself too. I also write a lot of short stories. I write mostly science fiction and fantasy. I live out here in Utah with my wife and daughter, and we're expecting another one pretty soon. So that'll be really
Congratulations.
really great. Thanks.
So you're a typical overachiever. One wasn't enough.
Pretty much. Yeah, we'll see if 2 or 3 is enough either. We'll find out soon, I guess.
So sometimes nature has a way of, what's it they said in Jurassic Park? Nature finds a way.
Yeah. Well, got married a little late, but we're getting got married a little late, but we're off to the races. So yeah.
It must be the beard. I'm told that makes a difference.
Yes, it does.
I'm just jealous. I can't grow one. I tried once and I looked like the Unabomber. It was bad. It's bad. Anyway, so the next part of the introduction, dear listener, is how we first found them. So if you've listened to me talk before, I actually found his books when I first got diagnosed with a brain injury and I couldn't read. Then the neurologist said, hey, there's this thing called a Kindle and you can magnify the print. And so I did that, and quickly you realize that you find all the cheap books that, well, they look like they were cheap for a reason. And I stumbled onto your serials, which made it, they were affordable, but within reason. So I found the serials for his Starfarers series, and I was hooked. And when things were bad and I was going to see people at the VA with Survivor's Guilt, I have to say his books kept me alive because he wouldn't tell us what was happening next. And so, that stay tuned for next week. I had to just one more week to find out what the hell happened. And the rest is history, and therapy worked. So seriously, if you're struggling, people, there are hotlines. Reach out, ask for help, message me. Like, that stuff's serious, and I joke about it now, but 10 years ago it wasn't as funny. So having said that, that's how I found him. So when we started the podcast, I knew we had to bring him on, and we've had him on a few times. So because you've been on before, we have to mix up the religion question, sir. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Terra Nova, Babylon 5, or Stargate?
Oh, funny story about Stargate. So I was having a Sunday dinner with my my brother-in-law's family, and we watched the pilot episode, but the one that has the nudity in it, and we didn't realize it.
Yeah.
And that showed up, and we're like, "Oh my gosh, turn it off! Turn it off!" I really did enjoy. I haven't finished none of the stories I finished all the way, but I've watched Babylon 5 through most of the 3rd season, I think, and I enjoyed it quite a lot. So of those 3, I'd probably say Babylon 5.
I like Stargate. I've watched the movie in theater, and I remember thinking this was going to be a cult classic. I was that hooked. Okay, was I that insightful or just biased because I really liked it? I couldn't tell you, but I was right. So that counts for something, I guess. But what's it they say? A broken clock is right twice a day. So who knows? But when I watched it with my sons, because modern TV seems pretty garbage these days, I said, oh, it was on TV in the 90s. It's got to be okay. And then that comes up. And of course, 2 little boys are like, preteens, like, oh, you can imagine the reactions. And of course, I'm frantically hitting all the buttons trying to make the dang thing stop. It was, but we had to have some conversations that night.
I've heard the rest of the series is not like that at all. Like, it's just that
it's
one.
The only episode at all.
Yeah, which is too bad, really. But I did really enjoy the movie as a kid. I really got a kick out of the movie when I saw it when I was kind of in the golden age of science fiction, which is 12 years old. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that was one of those ones where that part actually didn't make the final version or whatever. And then it was just, so when you get the movie version for the box set, it's there, and you're like, wait a minute, what?
Oh yeah.
All right. So are you ready for the fantasy one?
I hope so.
I know you're moving from more sci-fi to fantasy in general. So
yeah, it's a gradual migration. My heart's still in sci-fi a lot. So, but I will be having more fantasy content coming out in the next few years, I suppose.
Okay. So we've got Sword of Shannara, the Sword of Truth, or the Conan series
Oh,
or movie. Excuse me, I say series, but
haven't seen the movie, but I've read all of the shorts, all of the original shorts by Robert E. Howard. Really good.
okay.
Really love Conan. Some of them are a little bit dated. Some of them are a little bit, you're like, oh yeah, this would get canceled today. But there's some really good ones. My favorite one, there was one. It's one of his later ones. I forget the name of it, but he's stuck on this distant shore with a bunch of pirates, and there's three groups of pirates, and they're basically stuck in like a Mexican standoff. And Conan basically weaves his way between them and manages, because like one of them has the ship, one of them knows where the treasure is, one of them has the fort, and they're all trying to like slit each other's throats, but they all have to work together because there's like this evil monster that's like chasing them down. And Conan basically is able to double cross all of them and triple cross a few of them and finally get away with the girl and everything. So that was a really fun short story. I forget the name of it though.
Interesting. I'll have to check it out. I know John Carter of Mars was the other one that was on the list to potentially look at. The movie was good, but they didn't advertise the tie, so I don't think anyone realized it. And because they were so poor management at the series, from the movie perspective, it flopped. And it wasn't horrible, which is kind of sad because that's the kind of one you'd want to have potentially sequels. But such is life. What are you going to do? You can't make them market right.
Yeah.
So, all righty. Well, let's dive in. So first, because it's been a while since you've been on the show, we here at the Blasters and Blades love both the fantastical and the scientific. But what was your first love, sci-fi or fantasy?
Oh, definitely fantasy. No, definitely science fiction. Sorry. Oh man, my love for science fiction and fantasy really started when I was probably 7 years old and saw Star Wars for the first time. And so I was prepared to answer your question with about the religion thing with the Star Wars original trilogy, because that's definitely what really got me inculcated in a lot of this stuff. And then I read all the sci-fi, all the Star Wars books that I could find, and then realized there were some other books that were also sci-fi, and then that's how I started reading a lot of that stuff. In college, I started reading stuff like the Foundation books and things like that. And then I started writing the stuff, and I got fantasy. Let's see, it wasn't really until high school that I really got into fantasy. But I read a lot of the, what was it? I read Lord of the Rings, read a couple times, read The Hobbit a couple times, Silmarillion. Really love the Silmarillion, actually, which is kind of, I think you're not really a true, like really hardcore fan until you've read and loved the Silmarillion. But I mean, I don't know. I guess you could still be a Lord of the Rings fan and not read that one. It is kind of dense. And then I've just been decided to write the stuff, and just kept reading and doing that ever since.
Okay, so what was your first memory of engaging in speculative fiction? Was it reading the Star Wars novels, watching the shows? Were there games involved? Because we're of an age where video games were a thing. Where did you discover the genre?
I did grow up after I watched Star Wars. I did grow up like playing the old original X-Wing game. That's like super pixelated. It's like a flight simulator, and with the joystick. I remember. And I remember doing all kinds of impossible maneuvers that would totally black you out if you were a real pilot. But doing stuff like that to try to avoid and thinking I was a real hot shot with that. Or just like counting the pixels as you're getting closer and closer. It's like, oh look, the object is 5 pixels now. I'm getting closer. That kind of thing. But I think my earliest memory was probably watching an old Disney sci-fi movie from the 60s or maybe it was the 70s. It was The Black Hole. It gave me nightmares. It was really, and I read the book later. I think the reason it gave me nightmares is because everybody died at the end. I was like, oh my gosh, so they get sucked down the black hole and everybody dies. And it's just like, anyways, as a kid, I just got me terrified of black holes. And then it got me fascinated with black holes. And then I had to know everything about the universe. So that's how I really got interested.
That is a traumatic way to do it, but we'll take it. So what is it about speculative fiction? Because obviously speculative fiction is more than just sci-fi and fantasy, but that umbrella genre, what is it about that you love?
Oh gosh, there's a lot of stuff. I have a theory, which is that, well, first of all, just fiction and stories. I'm really entranced by reading about different stories and reading about different people. And the nice thing about reading books as opposed to other mediums, is that you kind of create the story in your head, and so you're able to. It's not as passive as other things, like especially with TV. You're kind of like just sitting back, and it's fun, but it's kind of a passive consumption. But with book reading, it more actively engages your mind, and it also allows you to really get into the head of characters. And my theory is that if a story is set in kind of the familiar world that we all understand, the thing that has to hook the reader is something fantastic about this person. So it's like you'll read this thriller novel about that takes place in our world, but it's about this like ex Navy SEAL guy who has like can do all these crazy things, and it's kind of like the character's almost larger than life, or almost maybe not as believable, because you can kind of strain credulity in that area because you're already in the real world. But the thing with science fiction and fantasy that I actually get really drawn to is where you have stories where the world is fantastic, and that kind of strains the credulity a little bit. So you have to, in order to make the reader feel grounded, you have to make the people seem like real people, and be like, oh yeah, this is how people would actually behave. They call it, I don't. People say they call it like character-driven fiction. I don't know if like a lot of stuff that people say is character-driven is actually not that good, or I mean, there's a lot of good stuff, but there's also a lot of stuff where it's like just boring, not a lot happening. Sometimes it's code for that. But I think when you have a story where like, no, there's actually action happening, and it's happening in a really interesting other universe or fantastical world, but the people feel like real people. Like, you're reading Lord of the Rings and you feel like, no, I would know who, like, I could hang out with Sam or Frodo. I know who these people are, just on a personal level. I think that's what really makes me keep coming back to a lot of this stuff.
So they say that the two things that you have to do, well, I call it the jokingly, I refer to it as the Barbie rule. So if you have your characters bending in such a way, and you can test it with a little doll, whatever, it doesn't have to be Barbie, whatever. But a lot of times people will write fiction, and I'm like, do they not know anything about anatomy? Like parts would be breaking off if you did this. And it's, and then the other one is, I heard it at a convention once, and somebody said something to the effect that the danger is if you got to get the little details right, so they'll believe the big lie. But like if you've got a horse, for instance, and it runs farther than it should, or it never eats, or it doesn't behave, because everyone's on horses and they're riding all the time, and everyone just seems to have a horse, not understanding that at the time they were a mark of stature because they're so expensive to maintain. And unless it's a draft horse pulling a plow, it has very other, like for the average person, they don't have the need for that. So if you don't factor in those little details, then they won't buy the big lie because you didn't sell them on the little one. And I think that's what's great about speculative fiction in general, is because you can, by telling the truth in the little things, you can have fun with the lie on the big things. And the lie being, the dragons are real, or, alien Ewoks exist, and, whatever. Right. And like, that's the fun thing about it is when you see people where their lines are, it's like, oh, so space breathing dragons is totally fine, but my Marines didn't cuss enough, and that's where I lost you. Okay, interesting line. And like everyone's got that line that's different, and I just find where everyone's line is. It's kind of fascinating.
Oh yeah. So, no, an example that I can think of is I'm just looking on my shelf here. David Weber, I think he gets things really, really good with like the military organization and this stuff. I mean, I'm not a veteran myself, so I don't have a whole bunch of experience with it, but it seems very much like, oh, it's kind of what Star Wars wants to be, or what Star Trek wants to be when it grows up. It wants to be an honor-verse story. Okay. But but the details about first of all, the rank and the military organization and the way the characters interact with each other is very believable. And so you get into these spaceships that can do these crazy awesome things, and it's like, no, I really feel like I'm on that ship, and we're doing all those interesting maneuvers and everything.
And that's kind of fun. I mean, you can wave your hand at a lot of them. The joke is hand wavium universities where we all attend, because the science can get in the way of the story, but that's the fun of it. So transitioning away from the reading and the consumption of the material, let's talk about, how did you decide to transition into telling the stories yourself?
Oh, like, how did I become a writer?
Yeah. Well, when did you decide to say, I like reading these stories and watching these shows and playing these games. Let's make my own content.
When was I cursed to become a writer? No, so I was it happened when I was pretty young, actually. I read, there was a bunch of stuff that I was reading when I was just 8 years old. And I think the main thing was, well, there's two books really. There was The Never-Ending Story, and it was also Wrinkle in Time. And I read that, and it just really got my imagination going, and in a way that And somehow I just knew, oh, I'm going to be a writer someday. Like, this is what I'm really interested in. This is the kind of stuff I like to think about and stuff I like to read. And I just kind of felt like, no, I'm going to be a writer someday. And I'm not sure how I knew that, but I just knew it. And so ever since then, it's been like, okay, now that if I'm going to be a writer, for a long time I was kind of like, well, it's something I'm going to do on the side while I try to pursue something else. And then in college, I took a few key classes and met some people. I was at Brigham Young University, and I took Brandon Sanderson's class. I was actually in his class when he got the Wheel of Time deal, I think, in 2008. Funny story, my wife was actually in the class at the same time, but we didn't actually meet each other until like 9 years later. So that was kind of funny there. But and that was really, taking that class made me realize, oh no, this is a business, like you can actually do it. And so then I graduated in 2010 and kind of in the middle of the recession, and didn't really have a whole lot of prospects, but I also didn't have really a lot of debt either, and I didn't have any people depending on me. And so I thought, and then also around this time, self-publishing was becoming a thing. And so I thought, well, why don't I just try to jump into that? And I've got some books that I've been submitting to. I've written a couple novels by this time, and I was submitting them to different agents and stuff. And I thought, well, why don't I publish a few of these myself and see how it goes. And so I just kind of jumped in with both feet, and it's just been doing it ever since then.
So Brandon was teaching before he was published at that level? I didn't know that. I thought the teaching gig came after.
So he was published. He published, his first book was Elantris, and then there was the original Mistborn trilogy. I think the Hero of Ages came out either while I was taking the class or right after. And at that point, he was a pretty solid mid-list author, but he hadn't really made it really big yet. It wasn't until Robert Jordan died and he got tagged by Robert Jordan's widow to finish the series that then he really became a really big name. And I'm reading the Wheel of Time right now. I haven't read the whole thing, but from what I understand, he really nailed the ending in a way that really won the gratification of his fans, and that's really what he already had a career at that point, and it was doing pretty well. But it was really the Wheel of Time that launched him into the stratosphere. And not only that, but the Wheel of Time was what gave him the platform. And then he just writes really good. He just writes really good books, especially like his endings. Like he really nails the endings on his books really well. And so I think that has really won him a lot of fans. And he also produces a lot of books. There's a meme I've seen of Patrick Rothfuss and George R. R. Martin and Brandon Sanderson, and it says, "Legend has it that these men never shave unless they finish a novel." And of course, Brandon is clean shaven.
Yeah, that's a good one. So, but we're not here to talk about Brandon. You're way cooler than that. So many authors will let their own real life experiences influence the stories they tell. So were there any specific formidable moments that you feel like shaped you as a storyteller?
It's really a lot of little things, and trying to put a lot of the little things, like when you write a novel, you're putting a lot of yourself into it, but in a lot of little ways and a lot of little pieces, and you don't always realize, what is like where it all comes from. I know for one of my earlier novels, Bringing Stella Home, the thing that I really, there was a movie that I watched, and I forget what it was. It was another old Disney movie. It was an old Western, and there was a boy who was trying, like his sister was kidnapped by the Indians, and she was going to be sacrificed at a certain day on a certain time on this cliff. And he was basically in a race to try to save and rescue her. And he, and this might've been the one that I gave you the last time I was on this show. I don't know. But, being the older brother and growing up that way, that story really hit me and really gave me a gut punch as a kid, because it's like, oh, like what if can I save my younger sisters, if I need to? Because I'm kind of growing up as an older brother, you kind of like to have kind of this protective kind of sense. And so that really, really drove a lot of the novel there, because the story is about a boy who his brother and sister are kidnapped and there's this war happening, and his brother and sister end up getting captured. And his sister is turned into this slave. They're both turned into slaves, and he basically tries to set out to rescue them. And so just his overwhelming desire to try to save them is really what drove a lot of that.
It's okay. Every time I ask this question, I remember a different story of my own in my head that obviously we don't say because we're talking to the guests. So I get it. Like every time something different will come to mind, which is part of why some questions stay the same and some we mix up.
Yeah.
So transitioning away from the writing side, let's talk about things from a fan angle. So since we've talked last time, have you gotten any cool fan art or had anyone cosplay your characters yet?
Oh, I haven't seen too much cosplay. I haven't really, you know, I was going to the con scene a lot before COVID, and then COVID happened, and then I just, for a year or two, haven't really gotten out. I haven't really stuck my toe out there as far as being like on the organizer end or having tables and stuff. I did go to FanX and see stuff there, but so I've kind of got a little bit of a lower profile, I think, on the con scene. Haven't seen a whole lot of really cool fan art or fan stuff lately, but I do get a lot of comments, a lot of emails from people talking about stories, and I send out a newsletter about every week and get a lot of comments from people about that. So that's fun.
Okay. So has anybody?
One of the fans actually, now think about one of the guys who emails me used to be like next door neighbors with the Heinleins, and he's like the 7-year-old man who apparently has like a giant house full of books that he doesn't know what to do with, which is why he buys all ebooks now. But he's like, and apparently he also knew my grandfather because they were in the oil business together back in Texas, and he was next door neighbors with Heinlein for a while. And I think he's a really interesting guy, and it's really interesting to hear from him. So it is really interesting getting to hear from the different people.
Okay. So has anybody asked for your autograph since you started writing?
Yeah, no, I've done a few signings, and I'm setting things up so that I can sell my books from my online store. And so I think I'm gonna, all the ones that that you buy from me, I'm gonna sign those if you want them to be signed. I think the first person. So my first story that I published was a short story in the student run magazine at BYU. It's called Leading Edge. And I think the first person who asked for my signature ever was Eric James Stone, and he's a friend of mine. Mine and my wife's actually. My wife was college roommates with his wife actually, and so we're actually kind of neighbors here in Utah. But I think he picked that up at like the first L2E where I was, and so he's like, hey, can I sign the story? And I'm like, this is the first time I've ever signed anything. So that was fun. That was about 10 years ago, I think now. But
so BYU really is one big happy family. Everyone's marrying everyone.
Oh yeah, pretty much. We're all just that's right.
Okay, so have you ever spotted anyone out in public reading one of your books since you started writing?
Not really. I've gotten most of my stuff. So self-publishing, it's a lot easier to put stuff out in ebook. I am putting more stuff out in print, making sure that all my books are available in print. I'm also doing a lot of I've started doing the auto-narrated audiobooks. Google has a program that allows you to be able to do that. I'm not yet at a point where I can get narrators because it is fairly expensive to produce them with the proper narrator. But I am hopefully, if these ebooks start selling pretty well with the auto-narrated, I may start be able to afford doing that with a human narrator. But just trying to get everything out in every format that I can. But the easiest format to get it out when you're self-publishing is definitely ebook. And it's a little bit harder to tell, is somebody reading this stuff? I have met some people who, like, when they find out who I am, they're like, oh, I've read one of your stories. And I'm just like, really? Those people exist? But it's always a little bit strange and a little bit terrifying to find people who've read your stuff. But so far, every interaction's been positive. So, well, mostly positive. But yeah.
Okay. So have you had any cool or funny interactions with fans since you started writing?
Oh, fun interactions with fans. This last FanX, I had a really interesting time. FanX Salt Lake happened right around my birthday, and I actually got a lot more birthday money than I was expecting. And I was like, you know what? I think I'm just gonna, because I see a lot of authors there, a lot of people with their booths, and I was like, you know what? I think I'm just gonna spend a couple $100 and just try to buy a book from everybody, basically. So I just went around to a lot of the booths and talking with people and just buying their books and everything. And so the mistake I made was that I only had a backpack, and it was like a Milwaukee contractor backpack, so it was a pretty sturdy backpack. But I had overestimated how much I could carry for long periods of time, so I ended up having this like 50-pound bag, like trying to haul it off and then back on the train and everything. But it was a lot of fun just to talk with people, and other people kind of getting their start and picking up their book. And I have no idea how many of those books I'll end up. I'm going to try to read them all. I have no idea how many of them I'm going to really enjoy, but hopefully I'm going to find a few good authors to to plug on my newsletter. So that was a fun experience. That's probably the most recent fun experience I've had as far as with different fandoms and different conventions and stuff. That happened about a couple months ago now.
So the cool thing about that is you got to exercise by carrying that book around. So, and you never really know, it'll surprise you. And then if you don't read it and you ever come on hard times and you can't afford to buy new books for a while, you've got a whole bunch of them that you haven't had time to read.
Oh my gosh. I have books just kind of come to me. I'm not always sure where they come from, but I'm always like acquiring new books. And so it's kind of, I have about, on my library, there's probably like the family library that I've got. Because my wife is kind of like, I like reading. She likes reading a lot too, but she doesn't think it's always worth keeping. Like she's kind of like, I like reading books, but most books I don't want to actually keep. But I'm kind of like, I'll just acquire books from everywhere. And so so I've got tons and tons of books, and I've just been going through them trying to figure out, okay, which ones we want to keep, which ones we not, and which ones do I read and everything else. But I have always acquired, like, there's a lot of ways to find really cheap books, or books on the cheap. Even just print books that I don't know. I guess it's my weird superpower.
Okay. Well, that totally counts. So we'll take it. And so can you give us sort of the readers? Obviously, your website will have all the things you've ever written because we keep that up on our website. But can you give us sort of the Reader's Digest version of your body of works?
Mm-hmm. So I've written a few series. I write mostly most of the stuff that I've written so far falls under space opera and science fiction adventure. So I've written a few series. A lot of them are kind of like in the same world, but like separated by thousands of years or different things, kind of like a far future galactic empires, and a lot of my books kind of take place more on the frontiers of those empires. I'm about to release an omnibus edition of my Sons of the Starfarer series, which was kind of after it takes place after the Star Wanderers books that you read back when you were in the VA. And those Star Wanderers books I've actually put them all together and turned them into a novel. I'm turning that novel into a trilogy right now. But I've written, what I've tried to do lately in the last couple of years is try to have something to release every month. And so to do that, I've been writing a lot of short stories, and I find that it actually is really, really useful from time to time to write a story in the same world or the same universe with the same characters, or just to take a break and just write, 3 or 4 or 5 short stories and knock them out. It's also something that I can send to other publications, anthologies and magazines, and and get stuff out there. So I've actually written quite a few short stories and just getting those out there. But that's so that's what I've been doing lately, is mostly writing a lot of those. I've been working on some of the novels. I've also been working on I've been revamping some of my writing techniques to try to write better, cleaner first drafts, and also to write faster. Because you do try to if you really want to, like Brandon Sanderson, if you want to be really successful, you got to put out a lot. If you can put out a lot of stuff that people want to read, then that's golden right there. Even if you have stuff that people want to read, but you're not producing enough of it, then you're going to have a bit of a problem there. And even if you're producing a lot of stuff that maybe not a lot of people do want to read, when people do find your stuff, then they have a lot of stuff to read. So I have quite a lot of stuff out there. What I've been doing lately with short stories, since there is so much good free short content out there, I have a policy where all my short stories, when I publish them for free as just the short story singles. But I only keep them up for maybe about 6-7 months at a time. So at any given time, I've got maybe about half a dozen short stories out. And then once I've cycled through enough of them, then I usually put out a bundle. And usually that's about $4.99 for the ebook, or $14 for the or $15 for the print. And so that's kind of what I've been doing.
Okay. So before we dive into the reason we brought you here, and if you read the title, it's about short content, we're going to pause for a moment while we shamelessly shill for the man.
What will you do when the world goes belly up? Will you paint stripes on your cheeks, grab your flaming guitar, and enjoy the glorious post-apocalypse party? Or will you gnash your teeth and wail at the loss of civilization? Either way, we've a story for you. This post-apocalyptic collection has 15 great stories, each with its own spin on our future. dive right into From the Ashes, a Bayonet Books anthology, before the future becomes now.
All right, thank you for sticking with us through that commercial interlude. And if you haven't checked out the Bayonet Books anthology series, you really should. Lots of amazing content in there. Some for people you might even have heard of. So give that a shout, and special thanks for our lovely narrator for doing those commercials for me. But all right, so before we dive into the specific short story, you mentioned that you were playing around with sort of new ways to release them because a lot of people like audio, but audio is both expensive to buy and expensive to produce. And sometimes the reporting mechanisms from some of the bigger venues are less than, shall we say, credible. I'm trying to be polite and dance around the edges of that issue. That if you're in the publishing world, you understand. So, how did you decide to try auto generated? Like, what was your experience with that?
Well, I was listening to some writing podcasts, and they were talking about this new technology that Google is actually putting out. If you publish, all my books are published wide, so they're on Amazon, but they're also on like Barnes and Noble, Kobo, Apple, and Google Play. And with Google Play, they have this thing where you can actually they're developing this auto narration technology where you can choose, for example, the what kind of accent you want it to be in. You can choose whether it wants to be like an older person or simulate an older person or younger person, and change a lot of different aspects of that. And so I heard about that and I started playing around with it and started seeing opportunities for that. I sell a lot of my books on my own online store as well. And the thing about audio. Sorry, just a moment. My wife's here. What's that? My wife's got to get her phone cord. But anyways, the thing about audio is you can't sell auto narrated books on Audible, which is kind of where pretty much all the audiobook content is. But but you can sell it on your own website, and they have this. There's a few services that I've been using. I've been using WooCommerce and BookFunnel. BookFunnel is a really great service that allows you to sell your ebooks. They handle all the delivery. So you're able to plug it in with WooCommerce on your site. And I thought, you know what? Why don't I just jump in with this? And so this is something I've been doing, starting with just recently. My books, I do try to advertise, hey, this is auto-narrated content. So if you're looking for a, so I know some people that doesn't really bother them, but a lot of audio listeners, it does. They listen for the narrator just as much sometimes as the author. So I try to make that pretty clear, but I also try to offer some deals on that too. So yeah, for the short stories, I've been putting out the audiobooks for free as well. They're usually they run about 30 minutes long or so, depending on the story. And yeah, I'm kind of in the early stages experimenting with it right now. But it's very affordable. And I figure, you know what, if it's something I can do, and it's an area where a lot of people are kind of talking about it, like, how's this going to revolutionize everything? And there's people in all different camps saying, it's going to change everything, and people saying it's terrible, we should never do it, which is kind of where we were 10 years ago with ebooks. People are saying ebooks are going to destroy literature, ebooks are going to do everything. And we're kind of in the middle somewhere, and I think that's kind of where things are going to play out with that. But I think if it gives my readers different formats they can choose from and different opportunities to get my stuff out there, I think that's that's it's all for the best.
Okay, have you actually listened to samples of the audio generated? Like, how does that play out as far as, like, obviously it's going to be different because maybe you don't get all the inflections of an actual narrator, human reading it, but how does it stack up as compared to the robotic voice you get, for instance, if Word reads to you?
Yeah,
Word perfect for you listeners.
It's much better than where it was even just a couple of years ago, and it's getting better very rapidly. I do in the interface where you can listen to it as it's narrating, and so I'll usually go through. For example, I'll find some words that, and you can go through also in the text and kind of change the text a little bit. You can tweak it when you record it. So I try to do that. I try to make sure that I can get the little weird ticks out. But yeah, no, I've listened to some of it, and I when I first got started with it, I was like, well, let me just put some of my stories through to see whether this is any good. And if it's not good, then I don't want to put it out there. But I listened to it and I was actually fairly impressed with it. And so I listened to audiobooks fairly often myself. And so it's like, it's definitely not there with a human, but it's very I found it very, very readable, very listenable, and thought, you know what, let's give it a shot.
Well, I have a funny spot in my heart for audiobooks, because sometimes even with ebooks and being able to magnify the hell out of it, just migraines are a thing. Who knew 27 concussions was bad for your health? And so sometimes just being able to pause the eye to brain muscle and just listen to it allows me to consume content on times where otherwise I wouldn't be able to. But if you're ever hitting hard times, man, that audiobook, $30 a book, can get you. And yeah, I mean, you can get subscriptions, or you can get the, paired buying when you buy the ebook and the audiobook, and you could save money. But we're still talking sometimes $10 or $15 to get that audiobook at that point. So if you could find ways for people on a budget to be able to consume, you might be allowing people to read who might otherwise not be able to. And so I like the idea that technology is going there. I know Joanna Penn has talked about that some on her writing podcast about the revolution is technology. Now, she's very much in the all technological revolution change is a good thing. I don't know that I always agree as a general rule, but I do think that this has potential. So when do you decide, okay, I'm ready to dive all the way in? Are you going to, are you satisfied enough to put your catalog out that way until you can get around to hiring human narrators?
No, I am. I'm jumping into it right now. I just have a lot of stuff to go through. So my plan is in the next few months to try to get everything out into audio. And then, my plan is to get everything out into audio. It's going to take a little while just because I have so much to go through. And also, trying to juggle that with also a little rambunctious 2-year-old who's, she's not taking her naps anymore. So it's like, oh no, what are we going to do? But with that,
they're only young ones, so enjoy it.
Well, and with the writing too, I do want to keep. I definitely need to keep the writing, and that is the really important thing. But no, next I am jumping into it with both feet and trying to do it. My plan at this point, so I'm still trying to feel things out and trying to figure things out. I think because I do have the two primary places where I'm selling my books at this point are my audiobooks are on Google Play and on my online store. So to really, whenever I release a new one, it'll you really have to sign up for a newsletter to really get the alerts on that. Visibility might be a little bit we'll see how that works, but there's as far as pricing and stuff, I think what I'm going to do is price it, around the same range, kind of in the lower end of the range for audiobooks, but still in that range where audiobooks are, but then do frequent sales. So right now, for example, I'm doing a $4.99 sale on my Gunslinger to the Stars just through November, and I'm going to release in the next couple of weeks here. I'm going to release the other books for that, the other books in that trilogy, and so have them at low that. And then also where the other thing that I think that I'm going to be doing is, ebooks. I think and this is just my own personal opinion, but I think if you buy a print book or you buy an audiobook, you ought to get the ebook at the same time. I don't see any reason why you shouldn't.
I can agree with that.
So that's what I'm doing on my store basically. So whenever you buy one of the things I'm experimenting with is whenever you buy a paperback or whenever you buy the audiobook, you also get the ebook just for free with it. So I'm just kind of, it's early days. I'm still experimenting with it, but I guess the way that I do things here is the way that I've done things as far as with the indie publishing and the indie writing has been just to jump in with both feet and figure it out, knit my parachute on the way down. Or just figure things out as we go along. That's kind of the way that I'm doing it here. I do have a plan, so it's not like I'm totally just winging it. I do have a plan, but the plan so far right now is just to jump in and see how it goes.
So, is this something that you buy a computer program that you then funnel your story into, or is this something that generates on demand as they listen? How does the technology end work in a simple sort of version?
So, BookFunnel has an app that you can download to your device, or you can just read it in your browser, and it will actually play in your browser or in the app.
So the app also does the audiobook?
Yeah, they're doing the beta too, so they're also kind of in the early days figuring this out too. But yeah, I've tested it, and basically, you can listen to the audiobook in your browser, so with any kind of browser, and they also have an app. I haven't tested the app experience, but I know that you're allowed, that you can do that there. I think you can also, I'm not sure. I think you can also download it and listen to it in a third party app, but I'm not sure about that. Yeah.
Okay.
You should be able to, but I'm not sure. But I do know you can. When I've tested it, I've mostly just listened to the browser, and that's been fine.
Okay, I'll have to check it out and play with it too. Because now, how does it work on the production side? Do you pay per conversion, or like, is there a program you use to generate the audio file, or do they do it on the consumer or on the market end?
So right now, Google, Google is actually also in beta with this, and so while they're in beta, it's basically free to produce, because I assume because they're just using the content to make it, to improve their design. So actually, the production doesn't cost a whole lot at all on my end. I think when they are out of beta, it's going to be a small fee to produce. But from what I can tell, it seems like it'll be a very reasonable fee. BookFunnel, when they come out of beta for their audiobook delivery, it'll be like an annual fee, I think of like $100 or something like that, but that's fairly reasonable from a publishing end. And so,
go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
As I say, so we've talked about the attempt to revolutionize for people, because some people won't read short content if they're audiobooks, because if they're using a credit, they want to get their money's worth, right? So I think the formula generically is, in order to break even on the price of an audio credit versus the length of a book, you need it to be at least 14 hours, roughly 10 to 14 range, before people think it's a good enough deal. Depending on, obviously, the more famous and the narrator and author, the shorter you can get away with. Like it's sort of a movable goalpost for people. But so that makes short content almost inaccessible for audio consumers. So I think it's amazing that you're doing that. But speaking of your short content, which is the other part of the interview, do you have a favorite of all the short stories you've written?
Oh boy, of all the short stories that I've written, oh my gosh. Writers say, oh, I can't choose between my favorite. It's like choosing between my children, and I think that's crap, honestly. My children are my children, my books are my books. They're totally different. But it is kind of hard to pick. I think the one that was the funnest to write, well, of the ones that are out right now, probably the funnest to write was, like in the graphic you have there, was either Prison of Dreams or Christopher Columbus Wildcatter, which is one that's the newest one right now is Christopher Columbus Wildcatter. Those are both stories that have you heard of the Cthulhu story generation cards, like the Cthulhu card system? Yeah. So those stories, what I've taken to with short stories is, whenever I'm like, oh, I need to write a short story, I'll grab my Cthulhu deck and I'll just draw a bunch of cards, and I'll just go for a walk and be like, okay, how can I fit all these things together? And usually by the end of the walk, stories come together, and that's how those ones came together. But Christopher Columbus Wildcatter was a lot of fun because the character's voice just really took off on a direction of his own. It's kind of this far future. He's this guy. His name is Christopher Columbus Jackson, and he wants to be an interstellar explorer, but he's kind of a scrappy kid on the frontier, and he tries to break in by becoming this asteroid wildcatter. And he has all these crazy, wacky ideas about, what things were like, and he's always talking about Christopher Columbus and, how Christopher Columbus fought the zombie Vikings on his, when he was trying to find the Northwest Passage, and then found Montezuma's gold in the Rocky Mountains. So he's got all these crazy ideas about stuff that's happened in the past, and he's always, and then he runs across, what is he? He runs across some warrior monks from the Church of Jesus Christ of Church of Jesus Christ of Post-Millennial Saints Orthodox, which in this universe are fighting transdimensional anomalies and doing all kinds of crazy things. So he gets into some pretty crazy adventures. But those are pretty fun to write.
So of all the short content you've produced, I really liked, I think it was Utah Raptors at Dawn or Velociraptors at Dawn, about where they basically, you duel on instead of a mount, you've got dinosaurs, because dinosaurs, what's not to love? And then you did one about time travel at Gettysburg, and I think it was the Gettysburg Paradox was actually the name of it. But I could be wrong. And that was another really good one that's, I don't know how to talk about that one without spoiling it, because but you think at first you're reading just a standard story about Gettysburg with one guy as a time traveler and watching it, and you're thinking, how is he going to mess up the timeline? And then the big reveal at the end was just chef's kiss of awesome. So that was a really good one. You should really check it out. Are those two still for sale? I know you pull them down, or are they in different bundles?
So those ones are different. Those ones are down now. The Gettysburg Paradox, it is available in my collection, Pilgrims and Time Travelers, and
Okay.
it's also if you hunt around online, there is a link to it on my website. It's it's a little bit buried. If you go to my page, there's a page that's all of my books in series order. And if you scroll down to the Gettysburg Paradox, there's actually a link to where it was published in a Gallery of Curiosities. And I think they still have the podcast of that up. So they did a podcast production of that one. So I think you can still download the podcast for that, if I'm not mistaken. I also sometimes will run, I'll do group promotions with other authors. And a lot of times I'll throw in a couple short stories for those. So a lot of times on BookFunnel or Story Origin, if you pick up free ebooks on those sites, sometimes you'll see let's see, the Gettysburg Paradox sometimes shows up on that one. Utah Raptors at Dawn, I believe that one is for sale in Times Such as These, which is the other collection that's on the graphic there. And that one, let's see, that one's a little harder to find online. I think it was published somewhere, but I forget exactly where it was. But that one isn't available in that collection.
They are very good. So I will link for you, dear listener, the link for the two collections that he has them on his end, where you can just buy them, and there's other short content. And then you did another one that had a really French word title about life on a spaceship during a interstellar Cold War almost, and it was like Lacist something. It was a French word.
Yeah.
That was really good. It would help if I could pronounce the foreign words, but I took German in college, people. I didn't take French or Spanish, so
yeah.
And German's relatively easy. You just got to sound like you're angry and you're about to spit on someone, and you can get the accent right. French requires a little more finesse to pronounce. So,
yeah.
But,
the one you're talking about is L'Enfer. I can't pronounce French very well myself, but it's L'Enfer c'est la solitude. It's kind of a take on, the title is a take on, there's this French saying, L'Enfer c'est les autres, which is like hell is other people. I think there's a short story, I forget the author, but it's about a bunch of people who go to hell and find out that hell is just being locked in a room with a bunch of other people forever. But this one is kind of like, no, hell is actually being alone all the time. And so that's where the title for that story came from.
So when you write your short content, and I know we got a limited time, you mentioned you had a 2-year-old and you got to put the little one to bed. So, we can't go long like we've been doing. And dear listener, we're working hard on getting at a sort of strict time limit to maximize everyone's writing time. But having said that, like when you're writing short content, it's very easy to get carried away and say, holy crap, this microfiction is now a Brandon Sanderson sized novel. So how do you limit the scope for yourself when you're writing them?
Oh, I think it comes with practice. I think after you've written a couple, it is a different art. It's kind of like, I guess I'm not much of a golfer myself, but I imagine it's a little difference between the difference between putting and driving. They're different, they're related skills, but they are a little bit different. And so you've got like a short game and a long game. And I think the thing with short fiction is that it is really good, is it allows you to practice beginnings and endings. And so I think a lot of times I think being able having, this is the core idea that I want to get at, and just focus on that and not get distracted by other things, that helps to keep it shorter. Or also being recognizing that you can only fit so many ideas in a story, and so knowing which ones to cut. The problem with Christopher Columbus Wildcatter in the early draft was that I drew way too many cards and was trying to do way too much. So I ended up splitting the story in half and turning it into 2 stories, and now I think I'm going to be expanding it into kind of a series of stories. And I think that knowing where to end things, and knowing that you can begin things pretty late, while the action is still going on, you get a really good sense of where's a good place in the story to begin. Not necessarily too early, not necessarily too late, but fairly late. And then also knowing that you can, getting out when you can pretty early enough. But mostly it just comes down to practice.
So there's a style of novel that sort of fell out of fashion because short content has fallen out of fashion because there's just not as many magazines, and it's not as profitable for a lot of authors, so they don't do it. And because they don't do it, there's not much of it out there. And because there's not as much out there, readers have sort of gotten conditioned that the only way to read is 12 billion story long novel arcs where the story never goes. And like there, I get it. I get hooked on some of those too. My only grievance with that is the only style of writing is, the main characters are going to live because there's 12 more books, right? And so the good thing about short content is it's a wild card in that anything could happen, because sometimes, they wake up and it was all a fever dream. Sometimes everyone dies and you're left just like, damn. And sometimes it's, everything in between. So with short content, unless it's a character from an existing universe, like anything is possible with those still. You're not locked in by hundreds of thousands of words, sort of locking it. So that there's room for that, I think, in the market. One of the types of stories that came out of that when everyone was selling all these stories to all these different magazines is a concept called a braided novel. Are you familiar with those?
A little bit. I think I've heard it called like a stitched together novel.
Yeah, so Kristen Catherine Rush did that with her Wreck Divers novel. The first novel in that universe was like 3 or 4 actual novellas that were in magazines. The basic idea is if you're writing in the same universe, you can sort of weave them together from several separate stories into one coherent novel, either by having them all be from different points of view or follow each other chronologically, and you just sort of mend the edges, stitch the edges. Because you write so much short content, are you ever going to do that with any of your short content? Are they all linked like that, or?
I think so. There's well, I'm doing it right now with the Christopher Columbus books. I do think those are going to eventually get stitched together when I've done them all. Under my pen name, I'm also doing a bunch of shorts. Under the series name is Zedekiah White. My pen name is J.M. White, and I think those are going to be. I don't know if there'll be a novel, but definitely a collection where they're it definitely has an arc. And I've been kind of inspired by the Solomon Kane stories and also the Conan stories by Robert E. Howard, where Conan definitely has an arc through his whole life, and so some stories take place when he's the king, some take place when he's just an adventurer, and so one thing that I've actually been experimenting with is outlining a novel and then poking around in the novel and saying, oh, I can pull this chapter out and turn that into a short story. And so I've kind of been doing almost the reverse of a stitched together novel. And a lot of my fantasy short stories are kind of like that. One story that I did, I believe that's in my 4th collection, but the story is Lord of the Slaves. That one you can actually pick up. I do run it fairly frequently as a free short story in the group promotions with BookFunnel and Story Origin. But Lord of the Slaves is one where I'm like, haven't written the novel yet, not exactly sure how the novel is going to pull out, but I've outlined the novel, and I thought, oh, this would actually be a really interesting kind of chapter to pull this out and throw this around a little bit.
So go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yeah, I'm done.
I say one of your fantasy short stories that I really loved was the hill. It's a hill upon which I'll die, or a hill to die upon, something to like that effect, which was your fantasy. It's actually a novelette. I think it was longer than a short story, but yeah, you do some interesting things and take some interesting perspectives that you don't really think about with fantasy. A lot of times in fantasy, like the orcs are just the default bad guy. They're created out of pure evil. Thank you, Tolkien. And so they're sort of the antithesis of what you want to be. And you sort of told the story of the orc without saying, oh, they're just misunderstood and there is no good and evil. You said, well, what if everything else is the good and the evil? Like you changed the paradigm without getting rid of the concept of good or evil and going for pure nihilism. And I like the way you did that, because I think there's value in stories teaching moral lessons without beating you in the face with it, even if the moral lessons is sometimes it just sucks and you got to deal with it anyway, right? Like, when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade, that kind of thing. Yeah. So you've got a lot of short content to choose from. So with that being said, if you could live in any of the universes you created, because I know we're button up time, your baby's going to want to go to bed soon, and I don't want your wife angry with me because we don't want her to fly down here and hurt me. So if you could live in only one of your universes, or one of the universes that you've written stories in, which one would it be?
Oh, I know exactly what that would be. Gunslinger to the Stars. But I want to live in it. I would want to live in it after the trilogy's over, because you get to the end. So much science fiction so much of science fiction is based on the ideas of like Malthus or Marx or Freud. Then these are really big thinkers that have really they've really influenced a lot of stuff. But you read a lot of science fiction, and especially like they take place in futures where it's like, we're running out of resources and everything is falling apart, and this is the idea of I forget I think it's John Malthus, but he was the guy who said, hey, our food production growth is arithmetic, but our population growth is exponential, and so eventually he's arguing that Thanos is right, that we need to kill off a bunch of humans in order to actually for everyone to survive, otherwise we'll overpopulate the earth. And I think that's complete bunk. I think that we are I'm very optimistic about humans being able to actually find solutions to a lot of these resource problems. And I mean, it might not be the kind of lifestyle we're living right now, but I don't think it's going to be a poor lifestyle by any means. And so in that universe is kind of a rebuke to those Malthusian ideas. And I'm trying to look for more science fiction that is basically like, no, we believe that in human ingenuity and human resourcefulness will be able to help us to solve these problems that look like they have no solution, but actually help us to get to a better future. And I think that that's the way things are going to go after we get through some of the craziness that's going on in these times. I think a lot of our energy crisis and stuff I think a lot of these crises are manufactured, and I think that there are some really reasons to be optimistic about the future.
So they did. It's one of the things Elon Musk has talked about, and for all he gets involved with political, one of the things he's talked about is the danger in actual population decline, because we've become so specialized that you actually need more people, not less, to make society function without us going backwards, technologically speaking. And I think there's some merit to that. I think we've got lots of wasted opportunities for resources, like so many homeowners associations, for instance. You can't have functional gardens. You can plant flowers that are just pretty, but functional gardens, you mustn't do that within city limits. And so this idea that we waste so much real estate on just grass that does no other purpose than aesthetics, I think if we started getting away from that and we put people back in touch with touching the dirt, go outside and touch the grass, as they say, I think you'll find perspective shift. I do think ingenuity is the mother of all, desperation is the mother of all invention, as they say. I'm probably butchering that expression, but I do think there is room to be hopeful as well. Before we let you go, and you're going to give us your second, you're going to give us your links, but you mentioned your pen name, Jade something, right? Can you tell us what that is real quick, and then what's the difference between that and your regular writing?
So my pen name J.M. White is actually, and I picked that name because I have an ancestor who I admire. He was a pioneer. He was a member of the Mormon Pioneer Trek, and I thought, and we share the same initials, and so I thought I would name my pen name after that. I write a lot of fiction. I write mostly mainstream science fiction, but I do write some science fiction that draws a lot more heavily on kind of my roots as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and a lot of the kind of more Mormon ideas and things there. And so when I write fiction that is more, no, I want this to actually deal more with those kind of things and really kind of more take things more from like a religious angle, or not necessarily explicitly religious, but more like it has things in it that might not be as palatable to like a mainstream audience. I write the stories under that under my pen name J.M. White, and so I've only got a couple stories out under that one right now. But let's see. But I've been writing these stories about this kind of almost like a Solomon Kane Punisher figure called Zedekiah White in this far future, and he basically is kind of going through his world and cleaning up and a lot of the corruption and a lot of the evil that he sees there. And so that's been kind of fun. It's kind of like if Solomon Kane were to be in kind of like to meet the Honorverse or something like that. It would kind of be a little bit like that. But then, and I've also done I've also just written a few one-off short stories. I have this idea. So the pen name really came from this idea of what if, like Jesus Christ comes again, he reigns on the earth, Satan has been bound for 1,000 years. And then but the real reason he did it was so they can build this giant spaceship so people could finally go to the stars. And I was like, oh, this sounds like kind of an interesting universe to write stories in. And so that's kind of the universe that I write those stories in.
Now, having read a lot of your content, okay, almost all of it, you do have some very sort of LDS themes running around it. Not that like you're beating anybody's face with it, but if you know what you look for, you can see it. And I just happen to have enough friends of your persuasion that you can start to see it just because people talk, right? So is this more on the nose as JM Wright, or is it Wright or White?
White.
Okay, I'll get with you after we hit record or stop recording, and I'll get those links as well. So if people want to check it out, they can find you. Presumably you have the same website though, right? Like you just differentiated on the website. Okay.
Yeah, I just use those ones. Well, I think the main thing is, yeah, I do have kind of themes, and you talked about like writing nihilistic stories. I don't think I'm really capable of writing a truly nihilistic story because I'm just not a nihilist at all. I think I don't think I'd be able to write that. But yeah, no, a lot of the stuff, it does kind of come out in a lot of the different stories. I try not to be too explicit about it, or too, but I do lean into it a little bit in terms of what I choose to write about and what really what kind of a world I want to create and everything. But I think the big difference is that when writing mainstream fiction, you've really got to create a world where it's like, well, this could be, the question when you're building a world, the question is there a God? And I think with mainstream stuff, you have to really kind of leave a lot of room, like, no, there is no God. Like this is, or not that there is no God, but God could be anything, right? You can't come down and say, no, like answer that question. In the JM White world, I kind of do answer the question actually. And it's kind of almost like a far future, like, well, like what if, the end of the world happens and it happens this way, and then things get a little bit different, and that's kind of one of the things that I've been exploring a lot with the JM White stories.
Okay, so I'm assuming the answer, just because we've known each other for a couple of years at this point, is the answer going to be the same for both. Your name is Joe and your pen name, but what age range, is generally speaking, is okay for your stories? Are they family friendly? At what age would you say? Because we have some families that listen to the show where it would be okay for a kid to pick your story up.
It depends. It depends on the story. I think a lot of the earlier stuff that I wrote was not as family friendly. Like a lot of the Gaia Nova stuff is not, or the Sons of the Starfarers. It has some language in it. It has some violence in it. Not generally a lot of explicit sexual content, but there is some violence and there's some other stuff. I think the most family friendly thing I've written so far is probably Genesis Earth, that trilogy. I mean, it'll swear on the level of like damn and hell, but and as I've gotten married and had a family of my own, I'm trying to write a little bit more family friendly myself, knowing that kind of limits your audience a bit. So I think going forward, a lot of my stuff is going to be more family friendly. The short fiction runs all over the map. Like for example, on the graphic you've got there, The New Covenant, that short story is very explicit. It's very explicit, very violent, got a lot of language in it. So that's definitely not family friendly. But it really does depend on the story, I think.
So as we bring this to a close, we're obviously going to ask you in just a second your social media contact. So if they will reach out to you, if they've got questions, are you available to answer that for them? If they email you or find you on your contact page on your website, would that be something you could do on a one-on-one basis, story by story?
Hey, sorry there.
Sorry about those technical. You are fine. Sorry about those technical difficulties, people. We will have edited that out before you watch this, so you won't see any of it. But we have apologize for the jump cut. So if someone wanted to reach out and they were curious about the family friendly rating of an individual story, is that something you could do if they wanted to reach out?
Oh, for sure, yeah. No, feel free to email me. Or ask on my blog. Probably the best way is you can email me. I've got a Gmail account that that's probably the easiest way to reach me. But yeah.
Okay. Well, this is the part of the interview, dear listener, where I remind you, please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right book. So do your part, people. It's a symbiotic relationship, the readers and the writers. And for your content that you're selling directly on your website, how would they review that? Is there an option on your website?
Yeah, you can review stories on the site. It's a little bit tricky to get there. I'm still building the site, so I need to make it a little bit more obvious there. But I think it is possible to review stuff on my website. Although the best place to review it is definitely if you pick it up on Amazon or on Goodreads. Those are probably the best places.
I'll let you review it too.
Yeah.
Book Club will. All right. So you heard him. So he's told you where you can review his stuff. So once you read it, go ahead and share your thoughts with everybody. But as we wrap this up, Joe, can you tell listeners how they can find you? What's the, obviously it'll be in the show notes, but what's the easiest place for people to find you on the interwebs?
Best place to find me is my my blog. It's 1001 parsecs, onelowerlight.com/writing. And best way to follow me and be apprised of everything that I'm doing is to sign up for my newsletter. I put that out about 3 to 4 times a month, and I try to have some goodie in it in every email that I send out. So.
Okay, and I follow that, and you get lots of cool gardening stuff too. So you should check it out, people. I'm a little jealous. My garden has not been as successful as of late, but I'll catch up. Give me some time. But you can find us, dear listener, on our Twitter account at twitter.com/SF_fantasy_show, Sierra Foxtrot _fantasy _show. You can email the show at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook, where all the shenanigans happen, over at facebook.com/groups/Blasters and Blades Podcast. Again, /groups/Blasters and Blades Podcast. We do have a Facebook page, the Blasters and Blades Facebook page. Unfortunately, right now we don't have enough people following it to give you an actual URL. It's just a bunch of gobbledygook. So you could look us up and hit the like and follow button over there. We would greatly appreciate it. I will soon be linking that over there on the Facebook group, so you guys can find it. We have a website at anchor.fm/blasters blades. Again, anchor.fm/blasters blades. I have been in contact with the people making the proper website, so stay tuned for that. You can support us over on our website at anchor.fm/blasters blades. For as little as 99 cents a month, you can help keep the lights on. Or you can support us more directly over at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. And be sure to put in the comment section that it's for the podcast. And I promise I will keep my co-hosts, Doc Cisca and Nick Garber, duly caffeinated. They will drink until their liver explodes, and it'll be glorious to watch. Maybe we'll film it and give it to you for free, dear listener. But as with that being said, thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For Nick Garber and the aforementioned Doc Cisca, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. And since you'll be listening to this right before the clock strikes for November into December, be sure to check out his website. I'm sure he's going to have all kinds of sales for gifts that you might want to give the reader in your life for the upcoming festivities. So do your part, people, and shop indie. All right, you have a wonderful